All right. Okay, I hope you're all well. So my name is Rowan. I work for the United Nations World Food Program. I am a monitoring and reporting officer, and in all my spare time, I do a lot of advocacy for youth employment. I'm the British Council Ambassador for Decent Work and Economic Growth, and I do a lot of this work on the weekend. Oh, my voice is echoing. One second. You guys, yeah, you can just keep your mics on mute. So I do this work on my spare time. I really enjoy it. And I hope you find the session today useful. I will share the slides. I always say my content is a no gatekeeping zone. So I will be sharing my slides. So don't feel worried that you have to take a lot of notes or anything like that. I've also recorded the session, so you should be able to see the recording. I just ask you to follow along. I'll tell you when something is really, really important. So I'll make sure to have your attention then. So when I tell you something is really important, make sure to drop your phone, follow along, so you don't lose the flow of the conversation. I'm going to launch a small poll now just to do a pulse check to see how people feel, and then I'll start the presentation. All right, so if you guys can see the poll, just give me a thumbs up because I haven't actually used the functionality of polls in Teams before. It's just a pulse check. How are you feeling today? You can't see the poll on the screen. You should be able to see it. Can you not see it? All right. Cool. All right, let me see the results. Nobody said great, guys. It's a Sunday. Not a single person said great, but it's okay. All right. So that was just like a mini icebreaker just to see how you guys were feeling. I'm going to start the presentation right now. I know some people have to leave a little bit early because they are in time zones where it's quite late. So I really appreciate you being here. I'm going to try to present the really important things at the beginning so that even if you have to leave and you follow along on your own, you can still like grasp the gist of the conversation. I'm going to keep Teams open just in case somebody still joins. I can still let them in. Can somebody confirm that you can see my PowerPoint?
Can see it. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So some of you guys are here. There's two main groups of you that are here. Some of you are here because you were part of the Bloom Festival that Jasmine organized. And this was a collaboration offer that I volunteered to do on writing achievement CVs. The other group of people are here because they have shared their CVs with me during the past month or previously, and they have asked me to share it on LinkedIn either because they were looking to improve their CVs or they were looking for a job. So these are the two main demographics of people that are here. And in all cases, I hope the presentation is useful. All right. One second. Okay, so the reason most of you are here is that you have a CV, you're applying to jobs, but you don't feel that your CV is effective, you don't feel that your CV is results oriented, or you don't feel like your CV is the best reflection of yourself. I have written an article on this before on how to describe achievements on your CVs. A lot of you in recruitments really look for CVs that have results, not simple reporting, not I did this, but what was the result? What was the impact of the thing that you have done? And the purpose of today's webinar is really to break this down into steps that you can do for every single bullet point of your CV so that your CV is more results oriented, it's written in an achievement language, and it gets you a job or it gets you a better opportunity. So many CVs that are shared with me, or many CVs that I see in general, they list what was done. So for example, I was managing a team, or I was procuring equipment, but rarely do I see a CV that has an outcome, or what was the impact of this work that you were doing. You managed people, so what? You were working on a project, what was the result? What happened? You mobilized some resources, and then what? So most people, you just admit a few people in. Most people do just fine with the action word, saying what they did, but then the struggle comes along when you want to describe the outcome, but you don't really know what to do. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. For the people that just came in, we're talking about how to describe achievements in your CV. There's 5 steps to do this. I'm going to be talking about each of the 5 steps in details, just so that you don't get lost. These 5 steps apply to every single bullet point in your CV. It's not for your CV globally. You should be applying these 5 points for every single bullet point. Okay, so at a quick glance, I've asked you guys to print your CVs, keep them somewhere next to you. I want you to take a look at your CV right now. Just glance at it and see if it has some numbers. In general, look at your CV and see if it has numerical metrics or numbers. Give me a thumbs up if it does. If you see a lot of numbers, maybe put a heart if it doesn't. All right. Supriya and Cassia are saying it doesn't. Jessica's saying a few numbers. Jessica, thank you for coming. I know I sent you the invite just a little while ago. So if your CV does not have any numerical metrics or a few of them, you're in the right place. Roughly speaking, there is this common statistic. I don't know how true it is, but the statistic is that a recruiter scans your CV for about 7 seconds before they decide whether they want to keep you in their pool or whether they want to shortlist your CV or not. Within those 7 seconds, something that really stands out is numbers. So if you don't have numbers on your CV, first of all, you're in the right place. Second of all, I really encourage you to add more numbers, and I'll tell you how and when and where and why to do that. Sam, I can see that you've joined. If you can just help me to admit people from the waiting room, because I'm not able to see anymore. So if you can just do that for me.
That would me, right? You're referring to me.
Sam Utoni.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Rawan, no worries, I'll do so.
All right. So this is the most important slide. So pay attention now. I want you to look at your CV and maybe look at one job, not all of them. And for this job, for that particular job, I want you to ask yourself 5 questions. All right, we're going to break it down. We're going to break it down into pieces so that you're able to do this yourself. So I want you to look at your CV, maybe the most recent job or the job you're in right now, so that it's easy to remember. And then ask yourself 5 questions. Number 1, what did you do at that job? This is normally an action verb. I hired, I managed, I procured, I mobilized, I bought, I supervised. So it's normally an action verb. This is the easy part of the formula. Most people get it right. Almost all people get it right. They have some action verbs in their CV. But it gets a little bit harder. So most people have some action verbs, some bullet points that start with action verbs. but it ends there. There's no result. The recruiter doesn't know how you managed somebody. They don't know if you were if you launched a social media campaign, what was the result? Did it improve sales? Did it increase the amount of followers? Did it increase engagement? They have no idea what happened after the action point. So this is where most people drop the ball at question number 1. What did you do at that job? And they end it there. This is a safe space, guys. It's a very small group. So if you already see this pattern in your CV where you have some action points with no results, no metrics, you can put an example in the chat or at least like flag it for yourself that this is something that you really need to work on. So question number 1, what did you do at that job? Notice that in any sentence in English, you would say, I supervised, or I bought, or I managed. In a CV, you don't do that. You just start the sentence without the subject. So don't say I, definitely don't say we. Some people make this mistake. So they say in an interview, less commonly in a CV, we were working on a project. This is absolutely wrong. The recruiter wants to hire you, not a team. So as soon as you start using this we language, it's very confusing and it loses the sight of your role in a project. So make sure that you start the bullet point. The first word of the bullet point should be an action word. I'll give you a whole list of these in the next slide so that you can have a whole list of them just in case you want to mix and match, pick and choose. You don't use the same word over and over again because that's also very boring. So is the first part clear, or is somebody not sure what we're doing with question number 1? I'm going to explain each question in detail, but right now this slide is like an overview of the whole presentation. Okay, Prajwal, you can go ahead. You can unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I have a doubt. My doubt was, people always tell to include a numerical value for whatever we have worked on. But the thing is, in my first job, I didn't know how much, for example, by the traffic increased or the sales increased. So how do I add the number then?
Okay, very good question. I think we will get to that. And if anybody has points as well, you can help Prajwal, but that's a very, very good question. We will get to that, Prajwal, later on at the end of the formula, but I'll just write the question down.
Sure, thank you.
All right, so that's the first part of the formula. The second part of the formula is a noun. So somebody's saying they're guilty of using we. No more we, no more I. Just start the sentence right away. The second question is, who or what did your work influence? And to make it easy to remember, I call these the 4 Ps. So a process, a project, a person, or a product. The 4 Ps. So in English, again, this is called a noun. Okay, so who or what did your work influence? It's going to be a noun. Okay, so you should have a verb followed by some sort of noun. I worked on this project, or I worked with the marketing team, or I worked with the monitoring team, or I developed an X product. So it should be one of these 4 categories. If you don't have one of these 4 categories, already it's watered down. It just says managed, supervised, worked on something. It just sounds so watered down. And what you're saying automatically starts to lose some of the credibility because the recruiter, even if they don't understand the project you were working on, just by you mentioning some sort of product or project or process or person, it already shows that you're not making things up. So this is question number 2. Verb, we said number 1 is a verb. Number 2, you have to have a noun. Number 3 is what Prajwal was asking about. How much or how many of question number 2. So whatever you said for the process, the project, the person, or the product, you should quantify it here. So this is question number 3. It's not always so easy. So sometimes you will remember, of course, I worked with 4 people, or I supervised 10 people, or I developed 1 product. Sometimes, of course, it gets very tricky. So the big things you will be able to remember, but the tricky things, it's going to be very hard to remember if you don't have that information somewhere. So let's say if you still work at the same company, maybe you can check the social media metrics and see if the reach has increased or the number of followers have increased since you started managing the page. This is one way to do it. Another way is you can look back, in your calendar, see your work calendar, the important things that you did in a certain year. Again, if you have access to that, if you have a written calendar, check. Maybe you had meetings with people, maybe you wrote some reports, so you can check your work diary, you can check your calendar, you can check your previous CVs, your LinkedIn, just to refresh your own work memory or like work history memory of the things that you have done. Of course, you can also estimate. The recruiter is not going to tell you, okay, you increased sales by 10%, like show me the financial records. But if you did actually increase sales by managing some sort of project or product or something, you could say an estimated X, you can estimate as well. It's fine. Nobody's going to go back and chase you and trace those records. But I advise you not to completely make something up. You will easily get caught and you will lose all credibility for everything else. So it's fine to estimate more or less, but don't make something up completely. Number 4 is how did you do it? So number 4, it's a technique. So for example, if you're saying, I conducted interviews, maybe you could say like I conducted a focus group discussion. Or if you're saying like I managed a social media campaign, you could say I managed a social media campaign on Twitter and the campaign was about something specific. So the technique, try to give a little bit of specificity to frame your answer. So that's question number 4. It's not always possible to include a technique, but if you can, include it. And question number 5, what was the result? So what was the result of questions 1, 2, 3, 4? That's question number 5, the hardest part of the formula. So the formula is at the bottom. 1 bulleted achievement. For every bullet of your CV, you should have an action verb in the correct tense. Past for the past and present for the present. If it's your current job, don't say, for example, managed. You should say managing a team of X, like in the present tense. You should have a noun. So one of the 4 Ps. You should have a measurement, metrics, numbers, a technique if it's applicable, and then the result. I'll stop here for a second. The next slides, we're going to be talking about each of these blocks in a little bit more detail. I'll give you some tips, and then we will go through some examples. So I'll stop here because this is the most important slide of the presentation. If anyone feels like something is completely unclear, but I'll still be explaining more as we go along. Oh, there's also, I forgot to tell you guys, there is a Q&A section. So if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A section. Just click on the Q&A and then type your question there. Then your questions won't get lost in the chat and I'll be able to answer them towards the end. Okay. I'm just going to assume that the slide was clear. I hope it was. But just to make sure before rushing to the next slide. All right, I can see some thumbs up. All right, Elisa says it was clear. For Prajwal, is it a little more clear right now, your question?
Yes, because that was the most confusing part, because if you completely make things up, your chances of getting recruited would go down. So thank you for clarifying.
All right, so we're going to go to the next slide. We're going to talk about question 1 of 5. So I hope by the end of the presentation, you'll memorize the 5 steps. I'll also share it as I promised. So question 1 of 5 is the action verb. So what did you do at that job? So just ask yourself, look at your CV, what did I do at that job? What was your role? So for example, can somebody tell me, unmute, tell me what you do at your current job or your most recent job? Come on, guys, don't be shy.
I can go.
All
So
right.
it's the first one to speak. I'm currently doing some part-time consulting job in education and supporting kind of project implementation and monitoring and evaluation, especially some projects in East Africa, education projects.
All right. What kind of project is it, Elisa?
So it's related to girls empowerment. So it's about basically scaling research. So we're taking an already existing project, doing kind of stakeholder mapping research to understand what works specifically in the intervention, because we want to scale it in another sector, which would be refugee camps and internally displaced camps. So we're also doing research in those places to understand how we can adapt those educational innovations. So basically, I'm doing all the technical support work of desk research, monitoring and evaluation, talking to the different stakeholders of the ground because we're collaborating with NGOs, report drafting and writing, meetings, all of these.
All right, great. Great job, Elisa. Sounds very interesting. All right.
Thanks.
So Elisa, when I first asked her, she did what most of you did. She just said the action verb. I do consulting, I support project implementation, I do monitoring and evaluation. So she mainly said the verb, the main thing that she does. And then and I asked her a few more questions, she started going into the what. What is she doing at that job? We didn't get to that part of her quantifying. So for example, she works with NGOs on the ground. How many NGOs? She does work on girls' empowerment. How many girls has she empowered? How has she empowered them? So if she's asking herself those questions, it's nice to give a high level update, but then you need to start really drilling in and asking yourself these questions to show the employer that you are making an impact. Maybe you don't know exactly how many girls that you've empowered, but you can have an estimate number of the girls in these refugee camps that you directly work with, for example. So you need to ask yourself these questions. Just sit and ask yourself these questions and try as much as possible to quantify. Yes, JJ.
Good morning or evening, wherever everyone is. I was just going to ask about the length of CV. So there's a bit of detail that these bullet points need, and I'm challenged with including all of that in a single bullet point. I don't want to be too wordy, but I also need to clearly give a bit of context so that recruiters are aware. Could you help us think through that aspect that might be challenging of creating these bullet points?
Yes, of course. And another great question. So, all right. So this is another great question. Of course, you don't need to include, maybe you can have a master CV, JJ, with all these bullet points. That's like your master document that you pull from, depending on the job that you're applying for. So for example, if Elisa is applying for another job in the future for girls empowerment and refugees, it would be justified more or less for her to include these bullet points. But if she was doing another job previously where the deliverables were not so related, you don't need to include every single bullet points, especially in a resume. So a resume is usually between 1 to 2 pages, and it's very difficult to include things in this level of detail. CVs are generally longer. They include a more thorough work history and they can be longer. Recruiters expect these to be longer. So it depends. Is a recruiter asking for a CV or are they asking for a resume? If they're asking for a resume, your resume should be between 1 to 2 pages, not longer, unless in exceptional cases when somebody has a very long and detailed work history, or like academics that have a lot of publications. Generally, a CV is 1 to 2 pages. A resume, sorry. A CV can be longer than that. I would say don't go beyond like 3 to 4 pages. Try as much as possible to only include the things that are really relevant for the job that you are applying for. So it's nice to have all these examples up your sleeve, but again, a recruiter probably only cares about the things that you will be doing directly in that job that you will be applying for. So I would advise you as much as possible to try to tailor your CV, have a master template, and then you can pull from these examples when you're applying for future jobs. But today, we're talking about like CVs, not resumes. So we're talking about CVs, and then you can have a master template. You can share that with me if you want. And then you can pull from that master template in your resume, depending on the job that you are applying for. And you can still, by the way, have the 5 elements and do it in a succinct way. I'll show you some examples towards the end of the presentation. So it doesn't have to be wordy at all. The idea is not that you have like long paragraphs. It's still going to be a bullet point, but it should show some results. So what did you do at that job? This is the first part of the formula, the easiest part. If you use strong action words, your CV automatically becomes more active, more engaging. It defines your role. So a recruiter looks at the CV and they know what you were doing at this job or at the previous job. So this one we talked about. Some examples of action verbs, I'll share the slide so you don't have to write anything down. They're in alphabetical order. So some examples are here. Don't keep repeating yourself. Don't keep saying manage the social media campaign, manage the team of 5, manage the project. It gets so boring. So try as much as possible to diversify your vocabulary because it's the first word of the bullet point. Try to diversify your vocabulary and use between the range of these words. All right, I'm not going to go through the words, it's just a list. You can go through them later. So step number 1, which was the pink step, was the action verb. Step number 2 is the noun. So which of the 4 P's did you work on or influence? So you start with an action verb, and then after the action verb, you say, did you work on a process? Did you work on a project? Did you work with a person? Did you work on a product? So these are the 4 P's. It provides context for your action, and it connects it to something tangible. It's very difficult to just say, manage something. You will have to have a noun in your sentence. As much as possible, try to stick to one of these 4 nouns. For example, again, can somebody give me an example, just at least of the first 2 parts, an action verb and then a noun based on your current work? You can just unmute. I can no longer see my teams.
Hi, can I just give an example?
Yes, of course.
So I've included, from my previous job, I've included the words produced high impact content.
Can you read the rest of the sentence, or you're reading from your CV, right?
Yes.
All right, read the rest of the bullet point.
Produced high impact data driven content that engaged target audiences for Apollo Hospitals, India's leading healthcare brand, and 42 Cares, a technology company, resulting in a 20% increase in website traffic.
Okay, good. So I think this was Prajwal, right?
Yes.
All right, I think he's almost there. He has a verb, produced. He has high impact content, and he said engage targeted audiences. He didn't really say how many. India has a massive, you're from India, right? I think I saw your CV.
Yes,
Prajwal.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So India has a population of what? Let's say 1 billion people, close to 1 billion, no?
1.5 billion, yeah.
1.5 billion. So India has a large population. Let's say he's saying that it engaged targeted audiences. So this is a very large population. So he's saying resulting in a 20% increase in viewers. We don't really know if this is a good increase, if it's not. So what's missing from Prajwal's statement is a result. So resulting in a 20% increase, which led to what? More patients were going to that hospital, more doctors were being referred to work in that hospital. There was better surgical outcomes. There was more patient awareness. I don't really understand the context so much, but it's still missing a result. So he did a good job. He has almost 4 of the five steps. He has a verb. He has a noun. The content is the noun. He has a verb produced. He has some metrics, and he's just missing a result. But Prajwal's onto a great trajectory if his CV continues in that way. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the second step. So the noun is a word that names something. So just keep that slide in your mind. You can talk about a process, a project, a person, or a product. One thing maybe that Prajwal did, he said high impact content. You can do that, you cannot do that. So it's up to you whether you want to describe how you did something. So some people do that. For example, they say effectively did this, or produced high impact that, or I did this quietly, or I did it clearly. It's up to you. Sometimes it's implied. So for example, you don't necessarily have to say that your content was high impact if in the result it shows that you increased sales, or you increased awareness, or you reached your ultimate goal. You can ask yourself, what was the ultimate goal of the project? What was the North Star? So if you reach that North Star, you don't need to explicitly say something was high impact or something was very engaging, because it's implied. So this is one way to answer JJ's question on reducing the wordiness. You can decrease words that don't really have a lot of value because they're implied. If you put the numbers automatically, if something is high impact or if something is if something is high impact or something is reaching the goal, it will show through the metrics. So that was step number 2. Step number 1 was the action word, the verb. Step number 2 was the noun. Step number 3 is the metrics, so the numbers. 1 second. All right, so step number 3 is the metrics, aka the numbers. So how much or how many? So as we said, on average, a recruiter scans a CV for 7 seconds. One thing that really, really stands out, and you can even do this, like look at your CV, blink twice and see how many numbers you notice. Numbers are really, really easy to spot, especially when they're written in a numerical form. Like a 7 is written as a number 7, not typed out. So numbers are really easy to spot, especially when they're written in the numerical form, not in an alphabetical form. So again, a really easy hack if you have numbers, especially smaller numbers, 0 to 9. Please write the numbers. I prefer the numbers to be written in a numerical form anyway. There's grammar rules for this. Numbers that are larger, I think, than 9 need to be spelled out, but I prefer the numbers. They're really easy to spot when they're written in a numerical form. You can also put, numbers are not just numbers, of course. It can be a percentage. It could be a financial amount. It could be a numerical data. Somebody asked me a really good question before we. I'm not sure who this is, but I'm going to mute. Yes, I'm just going to put you on mute because, or do you want to ask a question?
No, I'm just coming. I'm Sufyan Tukur by name from Nigeria. So I'm just coming now in why, because due to the network problem, that's why I didn't have any access to attend. So I'm just coming. We are all welcome. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to stand here with you. Thank you very much.
All right, no problem. I will be sharing the slides, so don't worry about it. And the meeting is being recorded. So step number 3, make sure you have numbers in your CV to quantify the 2 previous steps. So how much or how many of the nouns that you have in your CV. To recap, it could be a percentage, a financial amount, any numerical data. I'll give an example towards the end as well of somebody asked me a question, how to write qualitative work or how to describe qualitative work into measurable results. So attitudes, behaviors, perceptions, things that are non-numerical. Somebody asked me that question before we started, just before we started. So I will answer that towards the end as well, but it's also a very good question. So that was step number 3. I hope you guys are following. Is everyone following?
Yeah, we are following.
All right.
Thank you.
Step number 3. Now step number 4. So step number 4 of 5 is the technique. So if relevant only, how did you do it? So if applicable, you can add details on the strategy, the method, or the skills you use to achieve the results. It's not always applicable. This is optional, but it can really provide credibility and relevance to a specific job. So how you did something. I'll give you some examples later on as well of some people that did that really well. So it's hard to make a technique up. Again, you can put this, even if you don't want to include the techniques, you can include it in, let's say, one bullet point out of a few in a certain job, especially if you're talking about the same project over and over. But it's really hard to make up a technique. So I'll show you some examples of some people that did that really well. And number 5, step 5 of 5, the outcome. This is the ultimate magic sauce. What was the result? And this is where most people go wrong. So people get steps 1, 2, 3, 4 right, and then number 5, they fall off the bandwagon. So state the positive result or impact of your action. Ask yourself, what was achieved? What was improved? Focus on outcomes that align with the role that you are applying for. So if you're applying for a resource mobilization role, how much profit did you mobilize? What was this money used for? How many people did you reach? How much money did you save for a certain company? What was the impact of saving that money? Were you able to retain more staff? Were you able to start a new project? Were you able to cut costs on something else? So think about the positive results or the impact of your action. You may really need to think about this. It's not going to be obvious to you, but really take the time to think about it. For each of the jobs in your CV, let's say your work history has 4 or 5 previous jobs or previous employment records. Think about, if I wasn't there, if it wasn't me at that job, what would have happened? What was the positive result that I brought to this team? If I wasn't on this project, what was going to happen? What was not going to happen? So ask yourself these questions to be able to gauge the positive results or the impact of your actions, and then try to list those down. So as a summary, 1 bulleted achievement. Again, this is for every single bullet. You need to have about 5 items. 4 if you remove the technique. So action verb in the correct tense, past for the past and present for the present. You need to have a noun. So one of the 4 P's, a person, a project, or a process, or a product. You need to have some sort of measurement. And you need to have a technique, if it's applicable. And then finally, and most importantly, the result. So this is the summary of the formula. Before people start to ask me, yes, you can use AI to do this. So yes, but you still need to provide AI with the information. So you can provide the formula to AI, but you will still need to provide the information. Like, how will AI know how many people Elisa managed or Prajwal managed or Sam managed? AI won't know. So you could say, using this formula, and then write the formula: action, verb, noun, person, technique, and then result. 1 second, let me just admit the people that are joining. Okay. Write this bullet point of my CV and copy paste the bullet point in a results language. AI is not going to be able to provide you with the metrics. It's not going to be able to provide you with the correct technique. It's not going to be able to provide you with the result, or it can make up a result that's not going to be correct. So you can write the formula or feed the information to AI and ask AI to help you write it in a concise way. You could say, in one bullet point of my CV, help me write this in a concise manner. But it's not going to be possible for you to do this if you don't have the information, at least roughly, so that you can feed AI the correct information, so that correct input, correct output. Okay, and we can try this as well right now. Okay, so some examples. For example, I'll show you the before and after, and then tell me which is better. So before, this was a real example, sorry. So somebody say, established a functional community feedback mechanism incorporating beneficiary feedback. Two mistakes here. Can somebody tell me the mistakes with the, not the mistakes, how can we improve the before based on the little class we just had?
I think there's a repetition of words.
Okay, what else?
The result is missing.
Yes, what else, guys? Who else can help Prajwal?
The community feedback mechanism maybe is a little bit vague.
Yes, vague. So vague, there's no result, there's repetition, although it's a very short sentence. Who else wants to help Lisa and Prajwal?
It's not quantified?
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Supriya. So this is the after. It's a little bit long. It could still be better, but this is the after. Established. So you have a verb, a clear verb. It's the same verb that was above. A functional hotline. So community feedback, as Elisa said, is a bit vague. Feedback can be written. It could be oral. It could be an email. It could be in many different formats. So if you say a hotline, it's more specific, right? It's a phone line. So try not to use words that are very jargony or words that only you understand. If somebody from your close friends that doesn't work in the same field doesn't understand it, it's very unlikely that a recruiter will understand it. So the simpler, the better. So established a functional hotline for project participants. Instead of beneficiary, this word is again very, some people don't like it. It sounds a bit condescending. Resolving, Supriya saying it was missing a result. 500 complaints within 3 months. What was the result? Thereby increasing beneficiary trust. Beneficiary can be removed here. Beneficiary trust and improving transparency to us, to 6 multi-million project donors. So now it's more specific. It's still a bit long in this example, but the person at least tried to include some results, include a technique, include a noun, simplify, and then also include some time frames. Yes, Supriya, go ahead.
Something that you mentioned about like how can you make it generalized or how can you make it understandable to one of your friends who doesn't work in this field? What is the balance of showing that you have technical knowledge in something by dropping those buzzwords versus making it understandable to a recruiter who's not familiar with this?
I think that's a very good question. I can try, and then other people can come in as well. Feel free to answer. For me, it's a tricky question, Supriya, but for me, I would say,
Can I ask something here?
like for, sorry, somebody
Yes.
unmuted.
Yeah, yes.
Go
This is
ahead.
Sarah. One here, I think for someone to have like a clear achievement that can the recruiter can understand or can get easily, it's going to be related to the keywords in the job itself. I'm going to apply for it. So I have to adjust the achievement according the keywords related to the job specification or the job description already mentioned in the job post.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And by the way, Supriya, Sarah is a recruiter, so that's a good piece of advice. So, so some tips, you can include keywords from the terms of reference that was advertised for the post. Another thing is, even if you use technical terms, don't use abbreviations. Like I see it a lot with graphic designers and things like that. Like they say UX, UI. You could still say, user interface, user design at least the first time, and then use the abbreviation moving forward. If you're working on a specific project, at least you can say the theme, like worked on this project for improving health, something like that, but don't make it too jargony. I'm also against using words or phrases that are very complicated, not just jargon, but extreme vocab that you don't use in your day-to-day language. It's also it puts people off when they can't understand what you're saying. So the idea of communication in general is that you understand people and you are understood. If you're using very fancy, I think Supriya, you have a legal background, right?
No, it's actually governance and climate, but yeah, I was thinking about how you take all the stuff that I've done in governance, which is really yeah, terminology oriented, and being able to generalize that more to the environment.
Okay. If you want in a second, you could share you can put a bullet point from your CV in the chat, or you could share your screen and then we can see how we can help you. But for example, even if you're working in governance, let's say you were working on some sort of election, helping making the election process transparent. You don't necessarily have to say the policies you worked on or the procedures, but as long as you reached a certain result, you reached your North Star, which is most probably going to be a North Star in simple language, I would advise you to highlight that somewhere or the other. So this was one example. All right, we can go on to another example. This is something you see very often, right? So somebody writes, manage the social media campaign. This is a bullet point in a very average but common CV where people just write, manage this, or if you're lucky, they say the platform they use. And then this is the updated version. So first, can somebody tell me, if you just say manage the social media campaign, what does that leave the person on the other side wondering?
No high impact verb.
There's no impact for sure.
Very generic.
Very generic. That's another problem. So if you see a lot of generic language in your CV that even you can't remember, like if you look at your CV and you're like, oh, which one was that? Which social media was that? Oh, which team was that? If you can't even remember, it's not a good sign. So general rule, you should be able to look at your CV before an interview or while applying, and then, there's some sparks. You remember, oh, I did this, I worked on that. I remember some of the things I posted. I remember some of the results. So the after is manage the marketing team of 5. You have a verb and you have a noun and you have a metric. That's already 3 things out of 5 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words to create a Silent Reels Instagram campaign on autism awareness. Over here, I put the technique. This is a hypothetical example, leading to increasing followers by 200%. And increasing donations by 25%. So let's say if you were working on this campaign on autism to increase awareness, it depends on what your North Star was or what your goal was. So let's say you were working on this campaign and the reason you were working on this campaign was to increase followers and to increase awareness, then great. Increasing metrics is a great result because that was your goal, right? You just want more awareness, you want more people to read. But what if your result or your goal was to increase donations? Then mention that. If your goal was something else, then mention that. So this is just an example that I made up when I was working on the PowerPoint. So I was thinking like a technique, what would be a suitable technique? And I was reading about it, and about 1 in 4 people that have autism are not able to speak. They're nonverbal. So I was thinking, what would be a suitable social media campaign for this? So I was thinking silent reels, like there's communication, but at the same time, there's no sound, there's no audio. So people are aware that some people communicate without sound. There's other ways to communicate. So the technique, sorry, the technique adds credibility. How did you do it? So which one do you guys think is more effective? Although this is still a bit long, it can be refined, and you don't need to have both outcomes, but which one do you think is more effective? This one or that one? Maybe put a heart for the second one and a thumbs up for the first. Okay, so although the second one is longer, it still gives a bit of more perspective, especially if you are applying for a role in social media. You don't need to go so much in depth if you're applying for a different role or if that's not your area of expertise. The third example, this is the one that I was telling you about. Somebody sent me this message before the presentation. The message was, I work at the human rights sector and struggle with turning qualitative work into measurable results. So how many people do qualitative work in their day-to-day jobs? Okay, Lisa, can you just explain to everyone without jargon what qualitative work is? And Sarah as well. Can you just explain?
Well, I was going to say it is the opposite of quantitative as a lazy way. But yeah, I guess it's everything that's not so numerical. So for example, qualitative research would be maybe discourse based or interviews, focus groups, although you could have some quant in there too, but it's very kind of intangible sometimes, the impact, because perhaps the impact of an interview or a program will be like down the line, so you don't necessarily know so much. But at least that's my experience.
Okay, thank you so much, Alice. So quantitative data, like Lisa was saying, it's the type of research that most people think of when they hear the word research. It tells us how much or how many or how often. It's a calculation, all right? So qualitative data helps us understand how something happened or why something happened or what happened behind certain behaviors. So for example, like a hand washing campaign, you want to know why people don't wash their hands. That would be like qualitative research. But if you're counting like how many people wash their hands before they cook a meal or something like that, that would be more quantitative. So the person was asking me, she works in human rights. She mainly works with qualitative work, and she wants to transform this qualitative work into measurable results. If this is your experience or this is the type of work you do, you just give me a thumbs up so that I can know. So for example, you can do this in your day-to-day work. Let's say by using, let's say you can do a rating scale. You can ask people, how satisfied were you with this interview if you have some sort of rating scales? Or you can still count how many focus group interviews you conducted, how many like community dialogue sessions you conducted. What was the result? Maybe after you did a focus group session with a community, people told you there was reduced conflict after we talked about, let's say, giving money to women, and we talked about it in the community, and we had a focus group, and the men understood why. Maybe the result was that there was conflict resolution. Maybe there was conflict resolution, or maybe there was less cases of gender-based violence, something like that. If you can still quantify the result, it doesn't have to be a metric. So if you can see the result on the slide, it's a word, reduced conflict, but it's a good result, right? And maybe that was your aim when you did the focus group. You wanted to reduce conflict, or you wanted to understand why certain bad behaviors were happening after you started a project that you thought supposedly was good. So this is how you can quantify. So for example, This was the example before. The person's example was facilitated community dialogue sessions to improve intergroup relations. It's the same problem that we had in the previous slides. It's a bit vague, it's a bit mysterious. You don't know what was wrong with the group relations. So the after is facilitated 10 community dialogue sessions, resulting in a 25% reduction in reported intergroup conflicts over 6 months, as measured by community conflict resolution records. So if you can think about this even right now. If this is the type of work you do on a day-to-day basis, don't do it retrospectively. Don't come at the end of the project and say, oh, I want to know how my work made a difference. You can do it already, even if you give people a short survey, or you ask them by show of hands, how important do you think it is? Or you have like a suggestion box or something for the community, but try to understand as much as possible with whatever work you're doing, what difference it is that you're making or not making. The other example was conducted in-depth interviews with beneficiaries to understand their needs and challenges. Again, this is a very common thing that you see on CVs, conducted interviews with people. And then the recruiter doesn't know, right? There's no verb. So over here there's no proper measurement, there's no result. So you could say something like conducted 50 in-depth interviews. I identified 3 recurring challenges, which informed the development of 2 new programs, resulting in a 15% increase in beneficiary participation over the following quarter. So even if you end the sentence there, it can also be enough. Conducted 50 interviews, I identified 3 themes, which informed the development of 2 new projects. It's already showing that you were proactive, you were listening to the people, you took their feedback into consideration, and there was a result. I'm almost done. I know I promised to more or less try to finish on time. So I gave you a few examples. Now rinse and repeat for every bullet point in your CV. So not every CV attached to a job application should include every professional achievement you have had. So this was to answer JJ's question. A CV that looks like that loses sight of the tasks that are most relevant. So try as much as possible to tailor your CV for the job it is that you're applying for. Good CVs are tailored, they're results oriented, they're specific, and they're memorable. So I received a question as well before the session, how can I make my CV memorable? Your CV can be memorable not by adding lots of shapes and colors, but by having results, by having metrics, by being results oriented, and by being specific. The best CVs land you an interview and ultimately an amazing job. This is my book on Amazon. There is a chapter on CVs. It's not a very thorough chapter, but there is a chapter on CVs and resumes. I will also be putting the slides on my LinkedIn. You can follow me. I'll probably post them during the next week. If you are part of the 30 CVs in 30 days campaign, be patient while I look through the CVs. And yeah, I'll just stop here for the Q&A. All right. All right. Let me see the Q&A. So Supriya is asking, a question that I have is most of my work in the past few years has been in project management, which is more overseeing different processes, but hard to quantify, especially if you are in a supporting role of pushing other people's deliverables and activities. Supriya, I think you kind of answered your own question. So for example, before you joined this role, maybe if you're supporting a project manager, maybe the reason that they hired you was things were not going out on time. So maybe you could say like led to a decrease in underspending by 20% or led to work being submitted by deadlines at least 90% of the time. what's your magic sauce? Ask yourself, what did you, as Supriya, what did you bring to the organization when you joined? I think that can be your magic sauce. Like, if it doesn't need to be something, by the way, like a result doesn't need to be something completely out of the water. Like sometimes recruiters, they want to hire people simply for this reason. They get something done. And don't underestimate that ability. The ability to like push people's deliverables and get something done, that is all the magic in the world. So I think don't undersell yourself as well. Don't underestimate what your role has been in overseeing those different processes, but just reflect on the change that you have made.
The other, I think the second part of that, the question that I asked in the chat is how do you measure something like that after, you know, you've completed the job and you're just saying led to increase or led to decrease, and you can kind of pull out the number of people that maybe you have impacted within the team, but it's very, I don't know, you know, if it's like 20% more efficiency or something, that would be primarily made up.
Are you
So.
still working in the same job?
Yeah, but about to leave.
All right. I think it doesn't have to be made up. So for example, any project proposal like has timelines, it has deliverables, there's a work plan. So maybe look at that work plan, and then before you leave, look at that work plan and see how much of it you helped move forward. So for example, if you had 4 reporting deadlines to donors, and because of you pushing through, you managed to get those 4 reports out on time. So you can say like 100% submission rate of all reports by the deadline. Or you can say like, increased monitoring efficiency, or you could say supported 2 project managers in making sure that 8 activities were executed from that project plan. So I think you just need to do a bit of research before you leave the organization and you lose that institutional memory, or you lose those access to those documents. What do you guys think? Does anybody want to help Supriya with her question? All right, does anyone have any other questions? Or I could see, oh, Supriya put one of her bullet points in. All right, so maybe we can use that as a little exercise. I'm just going to put it again in the chat, and then I'll ask you guys to see how you can improve it. Constructive criticism, okay? Led the development and communication of strategic governance approaches, focusing on state-captured energy transition and natural resource management, while ensuring that policies are centering the needs of local communities and promote resilience for long-term sustainability through multi-stakeholder coalitions. Any ideas how Supriya can improve this, for example? Doesn't matter if you don't understand the context. A recruiter can be somebody who is not a governance specialist. They're an HR manager. So if you're an HR manager, what will you be looking to see in such a bullet point? Just give her some ideas. Come on, guys.
So this is just from because I can like relate to this bullet point because I feel like it tries to really explain and go like and that's really great. But I just have a feeling that the recruiter would actually maybe just skim read it a little bit. So it's maybe a little bit long. And I'm also thinking, since it's actually including both the development and communication of the strategic governance approaches, it could be, depending on the focus of the rule that she's applying for, that she like or puts 2 bullet points to kind of elaborate either on the development or communication. I mean, depends, kind of maybe focus on one. And if that makes sense, because I think like there's a lot in there, like so much impact that could be disaggregated. And it's just captured in a little bit of a long bullet point. I don't know what others will think.
Yeah, good feedback, Lisa. So Supriya, it's a bit long. You can split it into multiple. You can split it into multiple bullet points. You can focus on the most important outcomes that you reached because of your work. You can include some results. There's no numbers here at all. So if there's any numbers that you remember, those multi-stakeholder coalitions, how many people were part of these coalitions? Like, were you working with a group of 10 stakeholders, 5 stakeholders? You could say as well, like, you can quantify text information, like you could say worked with government and non-government stakeholders, you know, something like that. So I think you just need to unpack it a bit. If this is your same current job that you're about to leave, yeah, if this is the same job that you are about to leave, I would still advise you to try to get that information before leaving. So go back to those project documents, count how many stakeholders you worked with, see if there's like some of them are multilateral organizations, some of them are government organizations, some of them are NGOs. So try to break it down a bit to show your versatility in working with different stakeholders. Like the way you would work with a private sector partner is not necessarily the way you would work with a government partner. So yeah, try to break it down a bit just to show the versatility of your skill. All right, I think that was it. If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to stay and answer a few more. Otherwise, one second. All right, I'm going to try to launch another poll right now. All right, so you could tell me how useful you thought the training was. This is just another, this is like an example of a qualitative thing. So I could say like, oh, I trained 15 people or 19 people and X% of them were satisfied, something like that. But you can rate how useful the training session was. If you have any feedback, you can put it in the chat. I will check, especially for those of you that came through the Bloom, I will check with Jasmine if there's a need to do the session again, if anyone wants to attend again. So yeah, you can just let me know if there was any feedback so that during the next session, I can make those revisions to the slides. All right. I hope you guys found the session useful.
I just have one question.
No problem.
Yeah, so my question was for someone who's wanting to enter the field of IR and apply to agencies like the UN, whose jobs you share. How how do we structure the CV so that the system notices it? In the sense that, do we include our previous job experiences that are not related to it first, or the education?
Okay, good question. Good question, Pajwal. So the UN, as you know, the recruitments are very competitive, especially for international recruitments. So you may not be doing anything wrong at all. It's just that the demand for the jobs is much greater than the supply for the jobs. That being said, you still have to submit a CV that shows the best of your ability. So pay attention. If the system is asking you for a CV, you can provide a CV that's a bit longer. The most common formats of CVs that are used are this type of format that I talked about today, achievement-oriented CVs. Let me try to find an example. The other type of CVs are, let me just show you, try to see if I can get you a real example of an achievement-oriented CV. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. I'll share again. All right. So this is a real example. It's like for illustrative purposes only, so the names have been changed and so forth. So this was an example of a consultant, a senior policy advisor, that is applying for a UN job, and the person has that job. So this person is sharing a CV of the job that they got. So the CV is written in a results-based language, okay? It's written in an achievement-oriented way. And this person also did something quite cool and quite different, is that the person took the competencies that were on the job description. Some people do this as well. It depends on how much experience you have. So this person took a summary of the competencies. The UN mostly does competency-based interviews, competency-based recruitments. So this person got a competency summary and used the same structure that we were talking about today, but for each of the competencies. So for example, for resource mobilization, as a newly arrived manager in these countries, conceptualized, he has a verb, and formulated another verb, viable resources, he has a noun, and led negotiations. So this was the process. Another noun, with government officials, stakeholders, and donors. He showed the versatility of the people he's able to work with to raise $100 million. So he has a result. So it's not so long. And this person showed that they're able to execute these competencies by providing a concrete example. So this is one way to do it. And then for each of his previous jobs, he more or less tried to have at least an action verb, some sort of noun, and in some bullet points where relevant, there is a result. So for example, secured X amount of dollars, contributed this amount of money, or there's some sort of result. We can look at another example, led an effective strategy resulting in a cost recovery of over 400,000. So he saved this much money for the organization. So it's not so long, although this person is very experienced. It's just 3 pages. It says do not exceed 3 pages. He doesn't have every single bullet point in his CV or every single role, just the things that were more or less relevant. The key things that he did were summarize the competencies and contextualized it to the role, and then put results-based language, achievement-oriented format, for each of the bullet points in his CV. So this is like a real example of how it's done in real life. It doesn't have to be so long, but it needs to be contextualized, it needs to be to the point, and it needs to have results. Is this a bit more clear?
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right. I'm glad you guys found it useful. As promised, I will put the slides on LinkedIn. You can download them. A competency summary would also fit in a resume. I mean, you can do it, but as long as you don't exceed 2 pages, if you're able to do it somehow, like commonly you see people summarize their own experiences in a paragraph, like a paragraph beneath their names. This is a very common format. I have that as well on my CV. So you can contextualize that paragraph that is like the About You section to include the competencies from that job description. So for example, you could say like a strategic thinker who has mobilized resources of X amount and so forth. So you can still, you don't necessarily need to say competency summary. It could still be the summary of your profile, but include the key competencies from the job description. All right, thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed the session and learned something new. And the people that have stayed way, I made them stay way longer than they normally stay awake. The people in different time zones, thank you, Sam O'Keefe, for staying so long. I appreciate it. And next time, maybe I should do a poll to find out the most suitable time zone. All right, thank you guys so much. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.